the question is, are we facing another climate clash in this election, which is looming early next year? Let's get some analysis of the Labor policy. Joining me is Director of Climate at the Australia Institute, Richie Merzian. Thanks so much for your time, Richie, as always. Labor's policy seems to have landed quite well, with even the Farmers Federation endorsing it today. To your mind, does it do enough to reduce emissions?
If the question is really, is this what the science requires? Then the answer is no. We need more. Australia should be doing more like 3/4 emissions reductions by 2030. But it is a practical package. It's not too bad compared to what they brought forward in 2019. It's slightly less. But it puts Australia in the middle of the pack amongst like-minded allied countries like Japan, like Canada, with a 43% target. So it's a decent, certainly better than the government, but falls short of what we require in terms of climate solutions.
There's a different landscape, though, at this election to the last one, with the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, the Chamber of Commerce, the Farmers Federation, among others, backing the Labor plan. So it has, do you think it's shifted the politics over the last 3 years?
I think people have helped shift the politics. We've seen climate change hasn't abated over the pandemic, certainly strengthened over the Black Summer bushfires, which was supercharged by climate change. So there's a strong public appetite for strong climate policies. The economics have changed. Renewables are the cheapest way you can get electricity now. EVs are coming on the market and they're getting cheaper and cheaper, as are home batteries, as are the electricity that you can pump out from your own home. So the economics have improved, the popularity is there, and Labor's picked a target that it knows it can actually deliver. And the solutions work off existing frameworks, which is good, which means we can hit the ground running and put the focus on polluters rather than on taxpayers paying for climate solutions.
And on those frameworks, you've got the safeguard mechanism, which was put in place by Greg Hunt, in fact, as the then Environment Minister, Prime Minister Abbott in office at that time. And the safeguard mechanism will be gradually increased in order to reduce emissions. The Labor Party says it will also provide exemptions for those that face competitive tensions in terms of trade-exposed industries. Does that make sense to you, or would you prefer that not to be the case?
It is continuing a long-held tradition, which is to insulate trade-exposed emissions-intensive, or we call them EDs, industries. But eventually, if we're going to get to net zero, then everyone has to chip in. And the way that the EU is doing that is actually putting a border adjustment. So there's other ways you can do it. The most important thing, though, is actually putting the focus on polluters, using those existing 200 or so most high-polluting facilities, tightening the caps up so that they actually have to decarbonise.
But many of them are already committed to that, aren't they?
But they haven't.
Two-thirds of those entities have committed to
Yeah, no, you're
net
quite
zero.
right. 2/3 have committed, but in the last 8 years, emissions under the safeguards mechanism have increased. They haven't decreased because they've been given too much headroom to actually increase their pollution. And that's why we need it to be tightened. And we need integrity in the system, because unfortunately, the current plan, even under Labor, is for a lot of those emissions reductions to come from offsets. Basically, mainly it's avoided deforestation or forestry projects, and there's real problems there in that market. We should be seeing these industries decarbonise because the solutions are there.
And so it's more than 140 companies, more than 200 facilities, including power stations and so on, within that umbrella. When Labor talks about having a net reduction of 5 million tonnes under that safeguard mechanism, can you explain to our viewers in simple terms, how would they net that out?
Yeah, I mean, so if you take the 200 most high-polluting facilities and you say we're going to basically only give you the permission to pollute to a certain level, then in total, their emissions should reduce by about 5 million, if that's the number that we're going with. So really, as a group, they should reduce, but individually, they'll have their own caps. And that's really where we want to see the emissions reduction take place. Now, Labor's banking on about 50% of those emissions reductions to come from buying offsets. That's not really the way it should be done. Overseas, offsets are a last resort, not a first port of call.
So to wrap up the Labor plan, in your mind, it's a pass mark, but it sounds like it's not an overwhelming pass mark from you.
It's a good package. It's a first step, but we need to see more. Much like the Paris Agreement, we need to ratchet further. And I think Labor also knows that, and so they included mechanisms in there to look at how they get the advice, much like we did during the pandemic, to actually listen to the experts and to improve the package. They're going to look at relying on the Climate Change Authority. They're going to bring back a climate change ambassador. One of the things that I think that's been overlooked that I think is fantastic is that Labor wants to actually host a UN climate conference here in Australia, because oftentimes Australia will go to these climate conferences and do little. Now, hopefully, we'll bring it centre stage and host it here.
On the carbon capture and storage technology, the government is investing in, with, I think, Labor's support from memory as well. But the Santos initiative at Moomba is going ahead. Does it show this technology is working as the government has envisaged it would? And, Santos played quite a role over there at those climate talks in Scotland. Yeah,
that's right. So Minister Taylor announced that Santos was successfully registered to earn carbon credits because it said it would bury emissions in its Moomba facility. But research that the Australian Institute put out today shows it's everything to date shows that Santos wants to use that project to actually enhance oil recovery. So pushing CO2 down, pushing more oil up, which means that there's no net benefit, because if you burn that oil, you're going to get just as much pollution, and that's the real problem.
But it's good to see that technology work, isn't it?
Well, that's the real question mark. CCS has been a colossal failure. Really, the only thing it's been good for is extending the social licence of fossil fuel producers. And if all it's going to do is offset rather than reduce emissions, then it misses the mark as well. The best thing we can do now is use technologies that work rather than technologies that have failed over and over again. Good to see that Labor doesn't have CCS in its plan.
Richie Merzian, I interrupted your work Christmas party. Thank you for coming in to chat to us.
My pleasure, Kieran.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.